Hello everyone, and welcome to my Young and the Restless official 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Will Claire spare her finest retaliation for Kyle? The best might be saved for last by Claire. Claire is pursuing retribution against the young and the restless. As of right now, Audra is the only person on her road. But could she spare Kyle her finest retaliation? He isn't precisely exempt from this circumstance. Lighting GC on fire. These days, Claire has a different mindset. She is pursuing vengeance rather than dealing with her loss. She had targeted Audra, who has been frantically trying to ruin her relationship with Michael Miela's character, Kyle. To woo Kyle, she struck a bargain with Victor. While drinking at Society, Claire joined Holden, Tessa, and Daniel in talking about grief. Claire felt brave after a few beers. When Audra and Nate entered the institution, she became furious. She drew Nate away and told him about Audra's arrangement with Victor. Audra had never run so quickly in her life as she did now. She lied quickly, but when she said that Victor didn't want Claire to date Kyle, she got herself into deeper difficulties. Nate questioned her about how she was aware of that. What comes next? Kyle isn't a helpless onlooker. Claire entered Society as soon as Audra planted a kiss on him. Kyle appeared interested in it as well. It goes without saying that this was not their first kiss. To this day, Kyle has not admitted to their make-out session in Nice. In order to prevent Claire from questioning their connection, he stretched the truth. A kiss has more than one meaning. Kyle needs to admit that he kissed Audra, cheating on Claire. She should therefore save her plan of retaliation for him. Audra is rushing to mend her relationship with Nate already. However, the harm has already been done. Before he went for Nice, Nate had been wondering why Audra had left. He can now finally see his own misgivings clearly. It's possible that Claire will be the one to cheat in the end. In Nice, Holden had already considered the possibility that Kyle had not been faithful. He's arranging things so that he can have Claire exclusively. Additionally, she might be open to accompanying him all the way. Claire Newman's mind was a storm, each thought a flickering flame threatening to ignite into a full blaze of retribution, and she couldn't help but consider whether her most devastating retaliation was reserved for the one person she hadn't yet fully accounted for, Kyle Abbott. Everything in her recent days had been a calculated march toward vengeance, each step meticulously designed to unearth the consequences of betrayal, deceit, and the faintest shadow of disloyalty. As of now, the primary target of her wrath was Audra Charles, who had so thoroughly entangled herself in the lives of those Claire cared for that every whispered word and subtle maneuver had to be met with a corresponding response. Audra had been reckless in her attempts to sabotage Claire's stability, to worm her way into Kyle's affections, and Claire, never one to let grievances slide unnoticed, was intent on meeting each infraction with calculated consequence. Yet, despite the focus on Audra, the question persisted, stubborn as the late summer heat. Could Claire truly spare her ultimate retaliation for Kyle? He wasn't merely tangential to the drama. He was an integral part of it, a player whose loyalty and judgment had wavered in ways that could not be ignored, and the possibility that his actions merited the fiercest sting of her wrath tugged at her thoughts relentlessly. The fire inside Claire had been kindled long before this point. These days, she was different. Gone was the subdued Claire, the one who let misfortune or personal grief dictate her mood. In its place was a woman honed by disappointment and sharpened by the raw edges of betrayal. Claire had learned that vengeance was more intoxicating than lamentation, that satisfaction came not from enduring the harm done to her but from strategically returning it tenfold. And so, while Audra flailed in her frantic attempts to realign her own romantic pursuits, Claire watched with the cold calculation of a predator noting every misstep, every fleeting expression of panic or guilt. Audra's most recent entanglement involved a gamble with Victor Newman himself, an agreement forged to secure Kyle's interest in her and simultaneously undermine Claire's position in the social and emotional landscape she had painstakingly built. It was audacious, reckless even, but in a world where power and desire intertwined so readily, Claire recognized it for what it was, an invitation to strike. The setting where these events converged, Society, a hub of both celebration and subterfuge, was more than just a backdrop, it was a crucible. Claire had been nursing her thoughts with a drink or two, the warmth of alcohol loosening the restraint she usually maintained, allowing her courage to surface. Sitting with Holden, Tessa, and Daniel, conversations about grief had floated around them like delicate smoke. But for Claire, grief was no longer the focus. It was a mask for strategy. She had allowed herself a moment of vulnerability, of connection. Yet even here, the undercurrent of calculation never ceased. When Audra and Nate entered, the atmosphere shifted. A flash of fury crossed Claire's features. Audra, ever the schemer, had no inkling of the depth of Claire's awareness, no recognition of the storm she had invited into her midst. Claire's interaction with Nate was pivotal. Drawing him aside, she disclosed the intricate nature of Audra's arrangement with Victor, revealing the layers of manipulation that Audra had woven to ensnare Kyle. Nate, for all his insight and history with Audra, could not have anticipated the speed and intensity of Audra's reaction. She had never moved so quickly, her lie delivered with the urgency of a woman cornered, yet each denial only served to entangle her further in the truth. When she suggested that Victor had not intended for Claire to date Kyle, it was an attempt at damage control, but the consequences of her words were immediate. Nate's probing questions pierced the fragile facade she had erected, forcing Audra to confront the ramifications of her choices with brutal clarity. Meanwhile, Kyle was far from a passive observer. His presence at society, particularly when Audra made her move, indicated both awareness and a subtle complicity. The kiss that transpired was not their first, yet its ramifications were more than a casual dalliance. They were a breach of trust that could unravel carefully laid plans and relationships alike. Kyle had yet to confess the full nature of their prior encounter in Nice, his reticence a shield against scrutiny, yet it was a fragile shield at best. Every omission, every carefully chosen word, contributed to the tension, a tension that Claire, with her sharpened perception, recognized as both an opportunity and a threat. To Claire, a kiss was never merely a kiss. It was a statement of allegiance, desire, and potential betrayal. Kyle's actions, his momentary lapse, and his reluctance to admit the truth placed him squarely within the scope of her contemplation for ultimate retaliation. The complexity of the situation was heightened by the intersecting desires and manipulations of others. Audra, for instance, was already desperate to repair her relationship with Nate, aware that the damage inflicted by her ambitions was both visible and irreversible. Nate's perception, once clouded by absence and uncertainty, now sharpened into clarity, allowed him to see the consequences of Audra's choices with unflinching honesty. Yet even as these dynamics unfolded, Claire's attention returned inevitably to Kyle. Should she, reserve the most severe consequences for him? There was a compelling argument in favor of patience. By allowing Audra to suffer first, by letting her scramble and falter, Claire could heighten the eventual impact of any actions directed at Kyle. He was not simply another participant in the drama. He was a man whose choices directly affected her, whose fleeting moments of deception carried the weight of emotional betrayal. In saving her finest retaliation, Claire was not merely acting out of spite, it was a strategic decision, a matter of timing and psychological impact. This strategy, however, was not without risk. Holding back against Kyle meant that Claire had to navigate the delicate balance of appearing indifferent while her internal calculus plotted every move. Any misstep, any premature action, could alert Kyle to the inevitable reckoning, giving him a chance to counteract or evade the consequences. Yet, in a twist of irony, Kyle himself was caught in the web of perception and misperception. His own hesitations, his desire to maintain control of the narrative, made him vulnerable to Claire's machinations. A man as intelligent and socially attuned as Kyle might anticipate certain forms of retaliation, but the depth and precision of Claire's planning, particularly when driven by the intensity of emotional investment, promised to exceed even his considerable foresight. As these dynamics played out, Claire's internal dialogue revealed an unsettling truth. The pursuit of vengeance had become entwined with her sense of self. Each act of calculated retribution reaffirmed her identity, her agency, and her capacity to influence the fates of those around her. The question of sparing Kyle her finest retaliation was not merely a tactical decision. It was emblematic of the power she wielded and the discernment with which she wielded it. She had the ability to mete out justice, to orchestrate consequences, to transform perceived weakness into strategic advantage. In this light, Kyle's momentary indiscretion, the kiss that should have remained private, was elevated into a symbol of the broader narrative Claire was scripting, one in which loyalty, honesty, and emotional transparency would be tested against the relentless force of her determination. Holden's observations added another layer to the unfolding drama. He had long considered the possibility of Kyle's infidelity, the nuance of his interactions with both Claire and Audra suggesting more than mere friendship or casual attraction. In contemplating this, Holden was also manipulating circumstances to Claire's advantage, ensuring that the path forward remained aligned with her ultimate objectives. The potential for Claire to reconcile her desire for justice with the intricate social dynamics surrounding her created a narrative tension that was as exhilarating as it was dangerous. Each interaction, each carefully timed disclosure, became a move in a larger game, a game in which patience, foresight, and strategic restraint promised the most powerful outcome. The broader implications of Claire's potential retaliation extended beyond the immediate parties. Audra's schemes, once fully exposed, would not merely embarrass her or disrupt her romantic pursuits, they would ripple outward, influencing perceptions, alliances, and social hierarchies within the circles Claire navigated. Nate's clarity regarding Audra's behavior, coupled with Kyle's uncertain loyalty, created a fertile ground for strategic maneuvering. In this context, Claire's decision to withhold her ultimate retaliation against Kyle was not hesitation. It was the recognition that timing, impact, and psychological leverage were essential tools in her arsenal. By allowing the consequences to unfold in stages, by calibrating the intensity of each blow, Claire could orchestrate a crescendo of retribution that would leave no doubt of her resolve, intelligence, and emotional acuity. Ultimately, the question of whether Claire would spare her finest retaliation for Kyle was a study in the interplay between emotion and strategy. It was not merely a matter of vengeance for its own sake, but a reflection of the intricate choreography of human relationships, ambition, and moral accounting. Each decision, each withheld word or calculated revelation, carried weight far beyond the immediate moment, shaping perceptions, alliances, and the trajectory of events in ways that only Claire fully understood. The tension of this potential retaliation, the anticipation, the uncertainty, the careful observation of Kyle's behavior, served as a crucible, testing Claire's patience, her strategic mind, and her capacity to transform personal grievance into powerful leverage. In this swirling vortex of desire, betrayal, and retribution, Claire remained resolute. Audra had been ensnared, exposed to the consequences of her choices, and yet the ultimate test remained. Kyle, whose actions, whether intentional or inadvertent, had altered the emotional landscape irrevocably. By reserving her finest retaliation, Claire was not merely seeking satisfaction. She was asserting control, shaping outcomes, and preparing to deliver a reckoning that would resonate far beyond the immediate parties. Every glance, every interaction, every whispered revelation was a step in a larger plan, a plan in which patience, insight, and psychological precision would ensure that when the moment of confrontation arrived, it would be unforgettable, irreversible, and entirely of Claire's making. The stage was set, the players in motion, and the flames of anticipation flickered high. Only Claire knew when and how the inferno would consume those who had underestimated her resolve. Claire's mind refused to rest. The night at society had ended hours ago, but the images, the conversations, and the betrayals played on a relentless loop in her head. Audra's panic, Nate's bewildered questions, Kyle's subtle evasions. They were pieces of a puzzle that demanded Claire's complete attention. She could feel the pulse of her anger like a second heartbeat, steady and insistent, reminding her that patience was a weapon, that timing was everything. And yet, she also knew that Kyle's role was more complicated than Audra's. It was nuanced, personal, and fraught with unspoken tension. Unlike Audra, whose schemes could be addressed with exposure and humiliation, Kyle required precision, subtlety, and a touch of psychological mastery. She had to make him understand the consequences of his choices without giving him the chance to anticipate her moves. In the days that followed, Claire observed Kyle with the acuity of a seasoned strategist. Every glance he offered, every slight hesitation in his speech, every faint twitch of his expression was a clue. The kiss he had shared with Audra lingered like a shadow over his actions, invisible to most but glaringly apparent to Claire. She knew that he had lied, that he had attempted to bend the truth in her favor, but in doing so, he had opened a door that Claire intended to swing wide at the perfect moment. Yet she also understood the dangers of impatience. Acting too soon could alert Kyle, giving him the opportunity to mitigate the fallout or to manipulate her own perceptions. Her plan required careful orchestration, a delicate balance of pressure and restraint, and Claire felt an exhilaration in knowing that the game was entirely hers to control. Audra, meanwhile, had been trying to repair the damage as best she could. Her attempts to reconnect with Nate were frantic, desperate, and slightly clumsy. Nate, hurt and wary, had begun to see the true pattern of her behavior. For him, the kiss that Audra had stolen, the scheme she had enacted, and the lie she had told were not isolated incidents. They were signs of a character that could not be trusted fully. Claire watched from a distance as Audra stumbled, offering unsolicited advice to Nate, fabricating explanations, and weaving herself further into confusion. The irony was delicious. Audra had spent so much time trying to manipulate the dynamics between Claire and Kyle that she had completely underestimated the power of Claire's patience and insight. Each misstep, each frantic attempt to cover a lie, added fuel to the fire Claire was tending. The tension between Claire and Kyle, however, was the true storm. Kyle's presence was magnetic, his charisma undeniable, and despite the betrayal, Claire could not ignore the complexity of her own feelings. There was attraction, certainly, but also resentment, disappointment, and a simmering anger that demanded resolution. Every interaction between them carried an undercurrent of unspoken words. Kyle's eyes would flicker with a mixture of guilt and calculation, while Claire's measured responses conveyed awareness without revealing the full depth of her scheming mind. It was a delicate dance, one in which every misstep could alter the balance of power. Claire understood that the ultimate impact of her retaliation depended on her ability to maintain control over not just Kyle's actions, but the perceptions of those around them. Holden's involvement added an additional layer of complexity. Ever perceptive and loyal to Claire, he had been quietly gathering information, subtly steering events in ways that would enhance the impact of her strategy. He had considered every possibility, the exposure of Audra's schemes, the careful observation of Kyle's loyalty, and the potential for psychological leverage that could be used to Claire's advantage. His role was not merely supportive, it was instrumental. Through his subtle interventions, he ensured that Claire would have the upper hand when the moment came, allowing her to deploy her most devastating tactics without risk of counterattack. Claire's strategic mind churned constantly. She imagined various scenarios, each more elaborate than the last. Perhaps a public revelation, executed with precision, exposing the kiss between Kyle and Audra at the perfect social gathering. Or maybe a more intimate confrontation, where she would force Kyle to confront the emotional impact of his actions, leaving him vulnerable and aware of the consequences of his dishonesty. Each plan carried weight, each possibility was a calculated risk, and Claire reveled in the mental exercise of plotting the optimal course of action. She understood that true vengeance was not mere retaliation. It was a demonstration of intelligence, patience, and control, and she was determined to wield these tools with mastery. The dynamics within the Abbott-Newman-Spectra nexus were shifting rapidly. Audra's attempts to reconcile with Nate were faltering under the weight of her past manipulations, while Kyle's evasions were becoming increasingly transparent. Claire observed these interactions with surgical precision. Every smile, every hesitation, every subtle gesture was catalogued, analyzed, and stored for future use. She recognized that the power of her ultimate retaliation lay not in immediate action, but in timing, in the careful orchestration of events to maximize emotional and social impact. By waiting, by allowing the consequences of Audra's actions to unfold naturally, Claire could ensure that when the time came to confront Kyle, the effect would be devastating. The social environment of Genoa City itself became a stage upon which Claire could manipulate outcomes. Society gatherings, casual encounters at the Abbott mansion, and even fleeting conversations in hallways were opportunities to observe, influence, and guide the narrative. Claire's mind mapped every interaction, predicting responses, calculating the optimal moments for disclosure or confrontation, and ensuring that the elements of surprise and inevitability were perfectly aligned. She understood that power in Genoa City was often less about brute force than about perception, subtlety, and the ability to orchestrate outcomes from behind the scenes. Each step she took, each word she chose, contributed to a larger tableau, one in which she would emerge not only vindicated but dominant. Kyle, aware of the growing tension but unsure of its full extent, began to notice the subtle shifts in Claire's demeanor. Her measured silence, her keen observation, and her occasional pointed remarks hinted at an awareness he could not fully decipher. This uncertainty created a psychological pressure that Claire exploited expertly. She allowed Kyle glimpses of her knowledge, hints of her awareness, and subtle indications of the consequences he might face, all without fully revealing her hand. The effect was profound. Kyle's confidence wavered, his strategic thinking became cautious, and he found himself navigating a landscape where the rules were being defined by Claire, not by him.